Hello, good afternoon for all of us. We are from Group 11, Human Project 1 or tugas episode 2 with the title our research is Generating Entity Relationship Diagram from Requirement Specification using Natural Language Processing for Indonesian Language. This opportunity, I will present about background our research. Background our research is entity relationship or ER diagram model has an important role in system specification, analysis, and development. Entity relationship or ER diagram model is used in controlling and monitoring database system. Entity relationship or ER diagram is useful for designer or system analyst to model the system that will be used in database development. If we make ER diagram manually, that may be only and time consuming. So we need solution that can generate ER diagram that be effective and efficient. The research by Emma and Mustafa Muhammad 2015, they researched how to generate ER diagram using English case studies. They use text processing, post-staging, and identify entity, attribute, relationship, and primary key or PK of the target system by the parsing approach and successfully generating an entity relationship ER diagram. The research by Siti 2011, they researched how to generate ER diagram using English case studies. They also use text processing, post-staging, and identify entity, attribute, relationship, and primary key or PK using SVN classifier and Mary's pronoun, where the pronoun will be identified from the cross previous entity that is in the same pair of prefixes and or previous sentence. The research by Professor Muhammad Kasra Habib 2019, he researched about how to generate a diagram using English case studies and use text processing, post-staging, and identify entity, attribute, relationship, and primary key or PK. At the process parsing and use rule-based mapping or heuristic rules and obtain accuracy research precision 86.9% and recall 86.3%. The previous research used English text to generate a diagram. So, in this research, team will researching how to generate a diagram using Indonesian studies because generate a diagram in Indonesian does not exist. The team proposed a natural language processing process approach such as text preprocessing, post-staging, and identify entity, attribute, relationship, and primary key. In this research, the team using text preprocessing for Indonesian language according to research Uswatun Hasana 2011, text preprocessing is used such as scaffolding, tokenization, function removal, stop-word removal, and streaming for Indonesian text. In the post-staging process, the team using existing Indonesian post-staging using the conditional random field or CRF and Paxet is the Paxet, which contains the label for each word. Then, to identify entity, attribute, relationship, and primary key, to create a diagram using rules that have been determined by the research team. That's all from me. And next uh, will be presented by my friend. Thank you.
Now I will explain about analysis. Research methodology. Research methodology in the research can be seen in the picture. The first step is selecting the topic and title of final project. The next step, study of literature. The next step, data collection and data analysis, text processing, implementation, the next evaluation, and the last step is making conclusion and suggestion. I will explain about data analysis. In this study, we're using interview technique to collect data. The interview used was in Indonesian language. The results of the interviews or stakeholder requests will be summarized based on the answer spelling form in the text. Example of interview summarized in the text or requirement specification are seorang mahasiswa boleh meminjam beberapa buku. Satu buku boleh dipinjam beberapa mahasiswa. Semua mahasiswa sangat perlu buku sehingga tidak ada yang tidak pernah meminjam buku ke perpustakaan. Ada buku yang sangat laris dipinjam mahasiswa, namun ada pula buku yang tidak pernah dipinjam sama sekali. Satu buku dapat memiliki beberapa kopi, namun untuk kopi yang sama memiliki satu nomor buku. Setiap peminjamannya, semua mahasiswa disiplin mengembalikan buku tepat 1 minggu setelah peminjaman. And the next, I will explain about ER diagram analysis. In making AR diagram, the first we analyze the text used as a case study, then identify and determine the entire set of entities that will be involved. For example, student lecturers. Then determine the key attributes of each entity set. For example, the student entity has attributes ID, full name, and number handphone. Then identify and determine the entry set of relations between the set of existing entities. For example, filling, owning. The way to draw ER diagram is by using gen. There are several procedures for naming entities, relation, and attributes. Naming entities is required to use nouns, where relation use verbs. Attributes are characteristics possessed by entities or relations. Initially, attributes are descriptive properties possessed by each member of entity set. And the next, entity analysis. In Armada and Berliana research, an entity can be defined as a person, place, object, event, or concept in an organizational environment that has data to be stored. Entity can also be defined as a noun that appears in a system, description, or a business rule. The types and entities that often appear in case study are: the first is person, example employee, student, and customer. The second place and the example is office, branch, and city. And the next physical object or object. The example books. And the next organization, the example company or department. And the next event, the example of transaction and flags. Attribute analysis. In Mulia Ramhayu study, attributes are characteristics of an entity or relationship that provide detailed explanation of entities and relationships. Attributes usually function as identifiers and description for an entity. Attributes can provide a description or nature of an entity. The next is relationship analysis. Relationship is a component of the ER diagram which shows a relationship between a number of different entities. In a study conducted by Mulia Ramhayu, relationship is a relationship that occurs between several entities so that the relationship is named with verb, which can make it easier to read the relation. The verb that is used is usually the active voice or passive voice. Based on this, the research team identify a word label as a verb as a relation. And now primary key analysis. Primary key is one of the unique attributes that can be used to distinguishing an entity from another. In study conducted by M. Rodianto Arif, in identifying a primary key, there are several conditions in selecting the primary key. Namely, the primary key is an attribute that is unique and does not change. For example, student ID, employee ID, facial number, or backer. In this example, it is known that name, employee ID, and facial number are unique value because each study ID must have a different name, which is used as student identifier, as well as employee ID has a different value or ID between employee. One with another employee, the facial number is facial must have a different facial number. So because the primary key is unique value, it will it will not be redundant or the same value. Then the primary key must not have an empty value or null. For example, a student graduation date is a bad choice to be used as a primary key because it's not certain the student pass simulation and there is possibility the student will graduated late, resulting in their student graduation that will because some are empty or null. Analysis of ER diagram making stakes. In research by Dini and Hutagalung, conducted research on making ER diagram based on certain scenario or case study. This study all explained in the stack in ER diagram modeling based on a case study. Example, case to detect a relation in requirement specification. This is a example of requirement specification. Analysis of ER diagram making steps. Identify nouns that indicate people or humans, place, object, organization, event, and concept. In the case example above the words which indicate in the sentence 1. Seorang mahasiswa boleh meminjam berapa buku? From this statement, it can be analysis that mahasiswa is a type of person. Then buku is also include the type of object. So, in the sentence 1, two entities have been found, namely mahasiswa and buku. After identification is done in sentence 1, it is followed by the next sentence is sequence. Write to a list number down at this stage. The list of the entity that have been identified and try to determine the number of exciting entity based on the results of the entity analysis. Two entities were found, namely, the first mahasiswa as person, the second book as object. Performing a grouping of words then can be used as entities and attribute of the entity. And these take words are grouped into entities, namely student and book because in sentence 1, seorang mahasiswa boleh minjam berapa buku. There is a verb as a license, namely. After grouping the entities and their attributes, then describe or map the entities to form a regular group. To determine the primary key on each entity and determine the entities that are related to each other. The example is mahasiswa and buku. In the example sentence 1, it is known that seorang mahasiswa boleh meminjam berapa buku. From this statement, it can be analyzed that each student must have a different student number that distinguishes one student from another so that it can be seen that the attributes there is no student, namely student number is primary key because each student number has unique value that is different for each student. In the sentence 5, it is known that satu buku dapat memiliki berapa kopi, namun untuk kopi yang sama memiliki satu nomor buku. From the sentence statement, it can be analyzed that each book has only one different book number which can distinguishing between one and another. So from this, one of the attributes contained in the books is number buku. The following is example of identification results from each sentence based on the example case. Define the relationship between each entity. For example, the relationship between student and faculty which is drawn on the connecting to entity. In some of the sentence description in the example case above, it is known that the words identified as relations are the words borrow on and return, because the borrow is known as a verb, which indicate a relationship between the entities. So the word can be considered a relationship. The following is an example of the results of the identify the relationship between each entity based on this example. ER diagram rule analysis based on book entitled Analisis dan Perancangan Sistem Informasi untuk Keunggulan Bersaing Perusahaan dan Organisasi Modern. In making an ER diagram, there are several things that need to be considered, namely, the one entity. The first, an entity can be related to other entities. For example, in the sentence, seorang mahasiswa boleh meminjam beberapa buku. From the sentence, the entity is a word that the relationship in the other words. Sometimes the entity name comes before the attribute name. For example, satu buku dapat memiliki berapa kopi, namun untuk kopi yang sama memiliki satu nomor buku. From this sentence, it's known that the entity or book is placed before the attribute. And the second is attribute. The first usually information about attribute is taken from an entity because based on the attribute analysis subsection that the attribute function as an identifier and the nature of an entity. Then an entity must have attributes. The attribute name must be a noun. For example, in the sentence, satu buku dapat memiliki berapa kopi, namun untuk kopi yang sama memiliki satu nomor buku. Based on the explanation in the attribute analysis section, that attribute is an identifying word and explanation of an entity. From the sentence that the identifier or characteristic of an entity is number underscore buku, number is underscore buku is a noun. And the third is relationship. Relationship are relationship between entities and must have a name in the form of a verb. For example, in the sentence, seorang mahasiswa boleh minjam berapa buku. From this sentence, the word meminjam is a relationship because of the word. 2. Relationship must go both ways, meaning that a relationship must connect one entity with another entity. For example, in the sentence, seorang mahasiswa boleh minjam berapa buku. Based on this sentence, relationship is meminjam and the word connect the student entity and the book entity. Primary key. One attribute can be identifier or identifier of the entity, which is unique. Unique attribute is an attribute whose value cannot be the same. For example, in the sentence, satu buku dapat memiliki berapa kopi, namun untuk kopi yang sama memiliki satu nomor buku. Based on the sentence above, that has identifier or identifier that is unique because it is only has one book number for one book, so that each book has a different number. Thank you.
Next part is text processing analysis. There is case folding analysis. The case folding analysis is process to used to change all the letter in the text file to lowercase. Case folding is done so that the input text file can be detected or processed by the system. If there is a sentence that has a capital letter, the system cannot detect and process the text file. The following is an example of case folding analysis and the result of the case folding process. We can see on the table there's a kalimat where have uppercase and the result of case folding all the letter is lowercase. Next is sentence segmentation analysis. Sentence segmentation is performed to break down the text in the sentence to make it easier to process text or paragraph into smaller sections. You can see on the table that result of case folding there is one of paragraph, and the result of sentence segmentation is be part of the sentence is the sentence 1, sentence 2, sentence 3, sentence 4, 5, and 6. The next is tokenization analysis. Tokenization is the process of dividing a sentence into small pieces, or what is called a word or token. The result of tokenization as follows. From the table we can see the result of sentence segmentation, that is in sentence 1, that is tokenize to one by one of word. There is seorang mahasiswa boleh meminjam beberapa and buku, and next like that for the next sentence. The next step is stop word removal analysis. The stop word removal process is used to remove or delete irrelevant words or words that are not very important in the text file. Stop word removal is done to reduce the number of words in the text file so that the text file will be inserted into the system and read properly and thus not affect to the next process. The following is example of the stop word removal process and the result of the stop word removal process. You can see on the table that the result of tokenization that have part of the text one by one of the words, and the result of stop word removal that where before the word of seorang boleh has been deleted in the stop word removal. Next is postaging analysis. In this study, analysis of postaging is for Indonesian using the conditional random field method, which is based on research by Kemal Kurniawan in 2018 by comparing the postager method to find the best postaging method for Indonesian and the method in the highest accuracy, namely the CRF method with an accuracy rate 97.47%. The text set using in the Indonesian minority corpus text set, which is contained a label for each word. The following is the content of the Indonesian minority corpus text set, which is will be used, namely as follow. You can see on the image where the number, the tag, the description, and the example of the tag. The following is an example of a case on document specification that will be carried out by postaging analysis using postager. This is the example of the text. The result of the analysis are as follow, where the results are obtained by the code. In the table we can see that in sentence 1, the word of mahasiswa have tag NN, the word of meminjam have tag VB, and the word tag of buku is NN, and like that for the next sentence. Next is generate ER diagram analysis. The following are the steps taken in detecting entities relationship attribute in primary key based on the postaging result. In detecting an entity based on the result in the postaging result, the word class is detect whether a word is a common noun or an. If there is a word, then detection whether the word label NN is an entity using named entity recognition or NER. Analysis method where the word that describe people will be labeled with tag person, word that describe organization will label it as organization, word that describe place will label it with location, word describe time will label it with the time tag, the word describe size will be with a tag quantity, the word describe object will label it with tag object. From, from the result of entity detection from the post-staging result, the word included in the entity will be included in the entity list, namely mahasiswa as person and book as object. The second, in detecting relationship, the post-staging results are obtained based on entity detection, where the class of words that are between two entities will be grouped into the relationship. In sentence 1, in the detection of entities in step 1, it is known as two entities, namely mahasiswa as person and book as object, where there is a class of verb, word, or relationship between these entities, namely meminjam with the tag VB, and so the word meminjam is a relationship that connect mahasiswa with tag person and book with tag object. From the result of relationship detection, from the post-staging result, the word included in the entity will be included in the entity list, namely meminjam with tag VB, dipinjam with tag VB, and mengembalikan with tag VB. The third, in detection attribute in post-staging result, which is obtained based on information about attribute taken from an entity. Attribute detection is the name as entity detection, but in attribute it detects word with the other tag after finding words that are included in the entity list, followed by the words that are included in the list of relations. In the example of identification result in each sentence based on the example case in sentence 1 to 5, there is no attribute because there is no description of the identifier and the nature of an entity. The fourth, in detecting of primary key in post-staging result, which is obtained by on an attribute, it can be an identifier or identifier of entity which is unique. If in a sentence there is no attribute that allows it to become the primary key, a new attribute will be created as an entity identifier or primary key, which is generally becomes ID plus entity name or no plus entity name. From the entity result found in the entity detection step, the following an example of the primary key identification result for each entity. There is entity 1 is mahasiswa with tag NN. The identifier is no mahasiswa, and that's for entity 2, book with tag NN, have identifier no buku. Last is evaluation analysis. The evaluation analysis is done by comparing the ER diagram result generated by the system with the ER diagram design results carried out by the expert. From the result of the ER diagram component will be produced a comparison table between the system and the expert. Then from the result of the comparison table, the true positive or TP value will be calculated, which is a component that can be identified by the system and the expert. False negative of event is a component that cannot be identified by system but can be identified by expert. False positive of FP is a component which can be identified by the system but cannot be identified by expert. And true negative or TN is a component that cannot be identified by system and expert. Then the mean average precision value will be determined. From the result of the calculation will be known the ER diagram generated system can be described the ER diagram properly or not. There is our presentation. If there is our mistake of our word of our act, we say sorry and thank you for watching